Hello everybody, Dan TCV, TheCriminalViolin here, and welcome to episode 9 of CHATTERBOX. It is my podcast, of course, in case you all know. And today I want to talk about not nearly controversial, not remotely at all, not remotely contentious, not remotely polarized of a topic, abortion. It's something that everybody agrees on universally, and it's so amazing. There's no feuds at all. Nothing at all. Nope. Yikes. Well, anyway, let this horror show begin. Recently, this last week, as I'm recording this on the 21st of May, there has been, of course, media and internet frenzy and practically riot on the internet against various set of states in implementing abortion laws that are officially considered bans because at a certain point for all but one of them, it ends up a ban. One of them is straight up a ban no matter what, pretty much, which is Alabama. And of course, Georgia's one of the ones, that's the one that really kicked off the news first, where everybody took off with it, especially considering the big name media companies, the big film production companies, the big Hollywood stars and celebrities of various fronts, whether they're musicians or screenwriters, directors, producers, actors, what have you. They absolutely went apeshit. They absolutely lost their goddamn minds and went off on Georgia for their implementation of the law, which of course doesn't go into effect until I believe sometime early next year. But this is the one I really wanted to talk about, and then we'll work our way into the Alabama one, which is the other one that came up. And this is a topic that, of course, for me, it's a really important topic, and it's just something that I've always had very strong feelings and opinions, and I guess therefore kind of an attachment to, just because it's such a weird, to me, very twisted, just debate in itself. Because I feel sad that it's even a debate in the first place, but it's not for the societal reason. It's for the reason why you get ripped apart because you're automatically now a conservative Republican if you say that, and you're obviously super religious somehow. And so in other words, it's not because I think that, oh, it's a woman's body, they have the right to abort a child even when it's just about to be born, which it seems the severity of which they are at now. But it's the opposite of that. It's like, it just personally I believe nobody should be allowed to abort a child. Like, it's just, even to believe that it's their body somehow, when clearly it's not. It's something inside of their body, but it's not their body. There's a big difference there. I just find that so ridiculous. It's even a thing where it's like, well, Jesus. Anyway, let's just try and keep this aligned rather than letting myself just go off on the branches like I normally do. So I'm going to try my best with this. So, to start, the Georgia law that was passed, the media and most people that were against it were intentionally, in fact maliciously, spreading the rumor and the exaggerated truth of it, basically straight up lies about what it really was. They were trying to advertise it as an all-out ban. No matter what, you're banned from touching abortion, which is absolute bullshit. That's not what the Georgia ban, or what it should say, what the Georgia law is. What the Georgia law is it's proof that though most liberal people in this country demand that conservatives, or thus Democrats, demand that most Republicans, if not all Republicans, refuse to ever compromise on anything. It's their way or the highway. Well, the truth is, just in general politics, and no matter what it is, that's true for both sides of the fence, both the liberal Democrats and the conservative Republicans, or just the Republicans, or just the Democrats, or just the liberals, just the conservatives. They're all hell-bent on having their way. They refuse to budge, they refuse to compromise, and every time they say, oh, we're compromising, they aren't freaking compromising at all. They're claiming it is, but in reality, they're not budging an inch. That's why they always say is that if you don't have a majority in the Senate, you don't have a majority in the House, then nothing goes anywhere ever. It's just a stalemate until the next set of elections. Why? Because that's how the parties work. It doesn't matter what you identify as, what your party is, what your affiliations are, what your beliefs align with. All people in this country are intensely cemented into their beliefs, into what they see as morally right and wrong, and what they see as right and wrong, and they will not compromise. They will not budge a single millimeter, not even a nanometer, to anybody else that they see as somebody of a different party, of a different affiliation, because now those people are basically they act like each other are enemies, which they're not, but it's just ridiculous. So because of that, that's the same with abortion, it's the same with anything. Especially the more polarized the topic is, the more controversial it is, like abortion, the more hell-bent both sides are in having their way or the highway. And they will not ever budge. They just think that only their way is the right way, only their way is the morally correct way, only their way is the sensible way, or the logical way, or the caring way, or whatever else. And it's ridiculous. With that said, they're presenting it, mainly the liberals and Democrats are presenting it as an all-out ban, which is a total fraud. It's an absolute lie. You're being lied to. If you believe that, you're believing their lies. The truth is, it's not an all-out ban. They did make compromises. Somehow, some way, on something like this, a topic of all the topics that's super polarized and super controversial, of all parties, it was actually the Republican conservatives and religious freaks that are like, hey, you know what? We'll make concessions. We're going to make concessions to you. And they did. In this law, they made concessions. So one of the first concessions that are there is, instead of having an all-out ban like they want, they instead use the fetal heartbeat clause, which is you can get an abortion legally in their state until your prenatal doctor ends up telling you and informing you that yes, he's detected, or she's detected, or they've detected a fetal heartbeat. As in, that fetus now has a heart of its own, and it's functioning. Therefore, it's now its own life. Not your life, it's its life. It's now a separate life, a separate entity, a separate living being than you. That living being happens to be living inside of you. It's not your body. Basically is what that's saying. So in other words, you're not killing that child once it has the heart that's functioning. Because once it has its own heart that functions, that's the fetal heartbeat. That occurs anywhere between 6 to 10 weeks into gestation. So it's on technically a case-per-case or individual case basis, whichever way you want to say that. Which is perfectly reasonable. It makes perfect sense. It's perfectly logical. It should be 100% accepted. People should be cheering that on, but instead they're like, a heart doesn't equal a life. Sorry. Literally, the mass majority are saying a heart doesn't equal a life, and that is that even a functioning heart of its own doesn't mean that something's living. It doesn't mean that it can be considered a life, which is one of the most twisted, out of reality, fucked up things I have ever heard in my entire life. It's so sickening physically, and it's almost mental torture to try to even begin to see how people intentionally twisted their perception of that so far out of reality, and they're trying so hard to do that just to redefine in dictionaries what the definition of a life is, what the definition in medical journals of a life is considered. In biology, a life is considered. They're so hell-bent on getting their way that they're demanding the definitions conform to what they want. So they want to now change what the definition of a life has always been, to no longer be that way. Now it has to instead conform to, well, it doesn't mean that it's a life. It's not a life just because it has a heart and it's beating. It's functioning fine on its own. That doesn't count. Now it has to reproduce on its own. Now it has to self-sustain and keep itself alive on its own. If it can't do that, then it's not a life. Well, you have people arguing this so vividly, viciously now. It's ridiculous, because what that does is it opens the door wide open for people to say, well, then that 6-year-old child of yours isn't a life either. You know why? Because I fucking say so. Just because it has a heart that functions on its own. Oh, it can't reproduce on its own yet, and it certainly can't survive on its own. It has its parents take care of it, therefore it's not a life. That's literally the quote-unquote logic that these people are using to try and argue that it's illogical to say that you can't get an abortion because your fetus has a heart that's functioning on its own heart that's functioning fully on its own, because it cannot reproduce on its own. It cannot survive on its own. Therefore, it does not count as a life. That literally opens the door for people to say that a 6-8-year-old child technically, therefore, is also not a life. It's absolutely ridiculous that people legitimately have twisted their minds so wildly out of reality just to try to make things fit their agendas. It's ridiculous. Fit what they demand, what they want. It's disgusting that people are truly made themselves believe their own frauds, their own things that they know deep down inside is a lie, that they fabricated to try and argue, to redefine things so that they can rub that in people's faces if and when the dictionaries redefine a life to meet whatever their new definitions they're forcing is. And then rub it in their faces and say, see? It's not a life anymore. See, the dictionary's changed because they agree with us. They know we're right and you're wrong. So, fuck you. Like, that's so twisted. That's so mature. It's so twisted. It's so sick. It's ridiculous. So, that's the first concession that the Republicans in Georgia made. That's the first concession, and it's a major one for them, is no longer was it going to be an all-out ban, but it was going to be instead a ban after fetal heartbeat is detected. Again, that's by an individual basis, obviously, because it depends on each individual gestation period, where in the 6 to 10 weeks of gestation spectrum of time, the heartbeat is then detected. So that's the first concession they made. The second concession they made was, of course, something that, to me, I would think that Georgia, I could totally see Alabama and Mississippi going a totally opposite route. Maybe Kentucky going the totally opposite route, going with what Alabama did, which is basically almost making it just about guaranteed to also be illegal to get an abortion, even if you've been raped, even if it's a case of incest, or even if it's an underage person. So say it's a 12-year-old girl. Like, that's really fucked up in itself. Obviously, those options must be there. They have to, and they should, and they need to be there. So, but point being, that's not remotely surprising that Alabama went that direction. And they're backing themselves up the most possible way they can, which is in the stupidest ways, but it's for them, that's the only ways they can defend their own stance on that. They're doing it in all the predictable ways that Alabama would. Like, it's so Alabama. It's very Mississippi-like, too. But Georgia is like, you could almost argue it's the quote-unquote progressive or quote-unquote most liberal Deep South state. It's a really weird motley crew down there. It's a mess of a mixture of people. But that said, if you want to say it's a concession, their second concessions was the fact that they absolutely have it wide open to where you can legally get an abortion if you are raped, or if it's a case of incest, or you are underage. And of course, usually with the underage part, and it can be applicable to the other two, is it's considered putting you and or that child's life in danger. Then at that point, thus in danger is called a medical emergency, then you can get an abortion then too. They make that wide open. So that's wide open. You can get an abortion then, which is very, very logical. It's very reasonable. It's very sensible. It makes perfect sense. Nobody should be upset about that, nor should they be upset about the fetal heartbeat bill. The fetal heartbeat concession that they gave. So no longer is it at any part of the gestation you're not allowed to get an abortion. It is instead until a heartbeat is detected. That fetus therefore verifiably has its own heart fully formed and is fully functional on its own. From there to Alabama's, once Alabama's officially was announced and passed, that's when everybody immediately swapped their focus from Georgia to Alabama. Because Alabama's is an all-out ban. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. It's an all-out ban. If you're a doctor who is found to have ever once given even a single abortion, you automatically get 99 years in prison. They're literally not just banning it, they're criminalizing it. So it's such a severe that is not acceptable and is not okay. That is completely screwed up. That is very wrong. That is not going to help anybody. That is absolutely just, there's really no words for how disgusting that is too. Like, don't take away the options. I don't care if you personally are vehemently against abortion. You don't take away the option to do it when it's absolutely necessary like that. That's so fucked up. Like, you don't do that. You're gonna make it worse, not better. You never go for all out bans, just like you never go for all out free for all as all full freedom. Like, you don't just say, oh, you can get an abortion anytime, any place, anytime you want. Like, no problem. Any point in gestation, just you say the word to your natal doctor, you know, saying I'd like an abortion, and they'll do it to you, even if you're literally at the birthing table and in the maternity ward. You can get an abortion then too. They'll just stab the baby as it's coming out of your vagina. No, but it's just might as well at that point, right? But it's like that's what most of these people that are so upset about even the Georgia one. That's what literally, if you listen to them and you debate them on it, that's basically what they're arguing for. Is they want a wide open, 100% free. Like, you can just walk into your neonatal doctor's office and say, I demand an abortion. They can then say, well, you're 8.5 months along. You only have about a half a month before you're going to give birth. And then it'll be like, we don't care. We want it now. And they have no right but to say, okay, that's your choice as a patient. That's quote unquote your body. It's not your fucking body. Let's get into that now. The fact that they argue that somehow that's their body, there's no possibility of finding the slightest lick, the slightest sliver of any remote amount of logic in that. Because it's not their body. It's something that is living inside of their body. It is in their body, but it's a different body in their body, completely separate from them. It is nothing to do with their body. The only thing it has anything to do with it is it happens to be living and growing inside of their body. That's it. And yes, there's the whole argument that, well, you know what? Fetuses are therefore just, by definition, they're just parasites. So obviously we should look at them and treat them like parasites, like a parasitic infection. They just need to be eradicated. They're an infection. And it's like, that's also total screwed up, twisted, way out of reality bullshit. And you fucking know it. Yes, by definition, they are technically parasites. Any baby in a mammal, the way we gestate, since we don't frickin' lay eggs, yes, they are technically parasites. All mammals form their little parasites that they call fetuses, that they call thus babies, inside of them. Then they give birth, and still technically they're parasites. They're just a different kind of parasite now, because they're still reliant on you having to give them everything they need until a certain point of their life, which is way down the line. So, are you going to now start arguing for post-birth abortion, so to speak? In other words, just all out freaking stuffing the pillow in the newborn baby's face, or the 7-month-old, or the 4-year-old, or the 7-year-old's face, and say, fuck you, I decided I'm no longer going to spend the money I need in order to, in a stupid amount of time, just trying to raise you. You're a parasite, you must die, you're an infection, and I'm getting rid of you. Like, at that point, you might as well argue for that, too. Child murder gets redefined as post-birth abortions. Like, because that's basically what you're advocating for. With that logic you're using, that's literally what that amounts to. Is anything that cannot reproduce and or survive on its own is either A, not actually a life, or B, it's a parasite. Thus is an infection that must be eradicated. Both of those come from the same exact logic base, which I would call lacking any logic base at all. But in their minds, they use logic because they have it twisted from reality so far that they actually think that their delusions are reality, which is so stupid. It's like, if you use your brain rather than your emotional response, you actually literally see you have no ground to stand on. You have no legs to stand on. You're already frickin' a limp noodle on the ground that's been mashed a billion times by a bunch of Mustangs that ran over the top of you out in the Uzbekistani steppe. I mean, seriously, like, people are so dumb. They're so freaking dumb. How do you not see how illogical you're being when you make those arguments? How do you not see what that opens the door for? Of saying, well, then you're when you were 7, you should have been killed because you were technically an infection, because you were also a parasite, because you wouldn't have survived on your own. You certainly didn't have the ability to reproduce on your own. Therefore, guess what that means? You should have been offed, because that would have been eradicating a parasitic infection on your parents. Same goes for them and all of your other relatives. Like, that's what they're arguing, and they're too dense and stupid and hell-bent on having their way to even pay any attention or even come to have the remote realization that that's the reality of it. That's using the exact same line of logic. That's what that then opens the door to argue as well. It's absolutely disgusting, illogical, ridiculous, and out of line from reality. So out of whack. So twisted. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely obscene. Like, how do people get this stupid, this dense, this brainless, this dumb, this detached from reality? It's just wild. It's ridiculous. Like, I don't care who the fuck you are, what you claim, what you say. I don't care if the entire world comes against me for this and it's just literally me out of all the remaining 7+ billion people on Earth. If you all came against me and I'm the only one standing, I'm still standing by myself saying, I'm right, you're wrong, to everybody else. Because I am right. You cannot argue that having a functional beating heart of your own does not make you a life. Does not make you alive. Does not make you your own individual life. How the flying fuck does that not make you a life? Since when does suddenly this whole frickin' abortion bullshit suddenly make people decide to start arguing that having your own functional beating heart of your own doesn't equate to a life? How? That makes no flip-dicking sense whatsoever. And I don't care who you are, what you say, you're wrong, I'm right when it comes down to that. You either agree with me or you're wrong. End of story. Like, that's just because that's logic, that's the end of it. That's not me being polarized, that's not me saying, well, I'm just being an immature idiot saying, oh, I'm putting my foot down because I say I'm right, therefore I'm right. No, it's literally logic. You can't refute logic. So, if you don't see it that way, then you're probably one of those people that are so wildly whoring out for abortion freedoms, it's despicably disgusting. So, I mean, Jesus Christ, like, people, just use your brains for the love of all that is dead and decaying, or something, I don't know. For the love of all that's fuzzy and soft and adorable, or all that's living and kicking, or whatever, I don't care. Like, just come on, use your brains for once rather than your stupid emotions. Like, it's ridiculous. And I'm going to go on to this part, and this might be actually even more potentially touchy for people, because I'm going to go into the rape part of it. Because, to be 100% fair, I've never once agreed with the idea, personally, I've never agreed with and never will agree with the belief that if you're raped, you should get your baby aborted. The way that these people who have been raped and have to go through that reason it is, you have to, once your baby's born, since it's half rape, since it's half of the person who raped you, you're now looking your rapist in the face, and you have to face the face of your rapist every waking day of your life. You're taking care of your rapist. It's like, or you're taking care of your rapist child. It's like, are you freaking kidding me? Why do you distort it so far out of reality? That's total bullshit and you know it. It's like, here's the thing. You're lying to yourself because that's your trauma speaking. Get your trauma the fuck out of your head and out of your heart. Deal with that separately. That has nothing to do with the child. Has nothing to do with the child. Just because that child might have been a product of rape does not equate to that child's going to become a rapist himself or herself or whatever it is. Doesn't mean they are going to carry that trauma that you have. Doesn't mean they're going to carry that burden. Doesn't mean they're going to... It doesn't mean any of that. Where the hell do people get this twisted from reality idea? So diluted that they actually believe their delusion that somehow that is another rendition of their rapist, or that they're taking care of, they're somehow empowering their rapist, or they're somehow letting themselves still be enchained and entrapped by their rapist by having that child that was a product of the rape. It just doesn't make sense. How is it that they get it so twisted from reality that they believe their delusions that somehow that child's going to become a rapist themselves because they were a product of rape? Or they're going to somehow become demented or twisted or whatever it is? It's like, you're letting the trauma that you suffered dictate this fear that somehow you think therefore is absolutely true. It's very likely in your mind, therefore, that your child's going to turn out to be a rapist, or it's going to turn out to also be sexually twisted or demented or whatever it is. And it's like, you don't know any of that. As long as you raise that child right, you give it its best life, you let it discover who it is on its own as they grow up, in all likelihood, they're not going to turn out to be that way at all. They're going to turn out to be the opposite. Why? Because you raised them right. Like, you gave them the right influences. You surrounded them with the right kind of groups of people, and you let them also be themselves. Be self-expressive, find themselves, make their own mistakes on their own, make their own successes on their own, try new things on their own, whatever, Obviously, you're going to be there to support them and to watch over them, but as long as you're a good parent, you're not also going to get in their way and dictate, well, you're not doing that because I don't want you to, because it makes me uncomfortable. Like, that's not for you to do. That's your child's choice. They're an autonomous being themselves. Let them do what they want, If you swear on your life that they're going to fuck up because of it, it's going to ruin something about them, it might. Or then again, if it's that bad, likely it is, they're going to have a lot of lessons or a big giant lesson to learn from that. And if you let them do that, let them have that fuck up and let them have their face imploded, and then let them, you're still there to support them, help them when they come to you, but otherwise let them figure it out, stumble around on their own and repair that, they're going to become even a bigger and better person. Like, to think that they're not is obscene. Like, this is... being a product of a rape has nothing to do, has absolutely zero correlation with who that person, that child is going to turn out to be. The only thing that does is the influences they have, the teachings they're given, and the way you raise them. That's it. The environment they're raised within. Those are the only things you have to worry about. Like, because those things have, just like everything else, those are the only things that affect it, which means, again, there's zero correlation between them being a product of a rape and them somehow becoming a sexual deviant or a rapist or whatever the heck you think is gonna happen. Like, what the flying fuck? And at that point, here's the thing. That's why it also then immediately argues for itself at that point, on its own, for letting these kids be born and become their own people, is because, yeah, they might be, and obviously they are going to be half the person who raped you. Yes, genetically that's the case. And since there's no correlation between being a product of rape and them somehow becoming really twisted, or rapists themselves, then, if anything, why do you care? Why is it that somehow just the fact that they might look a little bit like the person who raped you, might have a trait or two, or maybe a few, via obviously the genetics of that family line, that might be somewhat like the rapist that they're a product of. Why do you let that disturb you so much and torment you so much that you dwell and you lock yourself in the cage of trauma, throw away the key, melt any other spares that are around, and make yourself buried in that trauma? But then you say, "Oh, I don't have the trauma anymore. I don't have triggers," you say, as you shoving it to the back burner and into the dusty, dark room in the back of your head to try and actively avoid it, because you know how traumatizing that is, how much pain and trauma and suffering that brings you, which is a whole different story. Like, let yourself suffer. Go through the trauma. Be honest with yourself. Let yourself see it. Not just inside of you, but outside of you. Let yourself see it. Express yourself. Vent. Let it out. Get through it. That's the only way you're ever going to get over your trauma and through your triggers, is if you let yourself face the pure, horrid, insufferable agony and trauma that you've suffered through. It's the only way. If you're just putting it on the back burner, you're going to make it all worse for yourself and everybody around you. That's how that works. You suffer so much more when you ignore it and say, well, it's too much. I can't handle this right now. I don't have the time. It's like, no, you're making excuses for yourself, because you're going to do everything you can at every turn, every possibility and chance you get to shove it in the dark, shove it away into storage and say, I'll deal with it some other time, because you know how much you suffer with it. If anything, it's a positive thing to suffer in extreme trauma, because it makes you have experience that not necessarily a lot of other people might not have. That gives you a big advantage in certain other situations, especially in the future tense. If you ever end up in a long-term survival situation, you have incredible gift of that knowledge after that, of getting through the trauma and past the triggers, to where you'll be able to aid other people who are suffering through the same kind of trauma, or the same kind of pasts. You can help them. In fact, that doesn't even have to be in survival situation. You can just help them at any point at that point, because you have the experience. So you are going to be the most impeccable connection for them to make, and for you to make for them, so that you guys can help build each other up and help them get past their trauma. And maybe it might uncover more things you didn't realize that you had left to go through. And that would be great, because then you grow together and you become better people, and you can put away each other's triggers and put away each other's trauma, and you know how to you fully understand each other and everything else. Like, there's nothing bad about that. That's only a positive thing. That's only a wonderful thing. Why do you act like that's such a bad thing? Like, like a lot of people say, you have to suffer in order to grow. It's like, for at least to a decent extent, that's pretty true. You have to go through the pain and the suffering and agony in order to even progress as a person. That's just a fact. So it's just kind of ridiculous to me that people let these little details, because of their trauma, impact life decisions like that so heavily, to where they're traumatized by the fact that really just these delusions that they have, that the child might end up as a rapist, the child might end up sexual deviant, the child might end up twisted, my child might end up super mentally ill, deranged, whatever else. They might look too much like the rapist, and that's too traumatizing, And it's like, let all of that go. Like, yeah, there's no way that somebody, unless they've been through that, can express how horribly traumatizing and agonizing going through that is going to be, for sure. But let's not let that emotional response and that trauma cloud our judgment, cloud our viewpoint, a worldview, and get in the way of things like that, of these realities. Because it's pretty ridiculous that you would just let yourself be under the trauma, the weight of the trauma that a rapist has caused you, for potentially the rest of your life. Like, would you rather get over it by suffering through the trauma, expressing it and all that stuff, or would you rather just suffer under that trauma for lifelong, which is technically, as a lot of people would point out, letting that rapist still be in control and have the power over you, which is really fucked up in itself. Like, how about instead you suffer through the trauma they caused, express about it, write about it, do whatever you need to do that helps you personally get through it, and then eventually, as you face all of it, you'll eventually get rid of all your triggers, you'll be rid of all your pain and trauma, and it'll just be a memory that'll be, as I already explained in one way, super valuable. I mean, you know, a lot of people are like, well, you've never gone through rape, obviously, Jesus. Well, here's the thing. I really feel awkward about saying this because it's not me, it's her, but, and I don't know if she'd want me to ever express this, but my own mom has been raped 3 times in her life. One of them by my own dad, which is really ridiculous and disgusting. Oh, I wouldn't put it past him, but it's just ridiculous. And sure, one of those rapes ended up in my brother Mario, which he ended up the family's favorite sibling. Like, all 4 of us siblings, he's the favorite, blatantly, like, easy the favorite. And I mean, seriously, the world would be, in my mind, it would be such a sadder, darker place without him. Like, everything that he's been through so much trauma too. This entire family has, in various different kinds. A lot of it similar. A lot of it the same, in fact, from the same person. And so we still have a lot of stuff to work through, for sure. He's one of them, obviously. So he's not as, super comedic, super lighthearted, super happy, just joyful about everything. Just like an array of sunshine no matter what. Like he was up until he was about roughly 16 when my dad basically destroyed him. Like our family, the joke is that dad, or in this case his name is Bill, so Bill killed Mario. Because he always went by Mario, and then eventually he suddenly decided that the bullies also now suddenly had a negative impact on him too, simultaneously, along with the event that really broke him. And we say Bill, or Dad, killed Mario. So now he's Kevin. And then... or then he was Kevin, and now he's more Kevmar again. So it's like Kevmar's like the progression after Kevin of slowly maybe going back towards more like Mario, classic Mario. But it's just like, it's because he has to go through a lot of the suffering and pain that he kind of boxes away too. Him and my sister Erica are really bad about that. And it's going to be really funny if either of them listen to this, because they're going to be like, what the fuck? It's like, well, ain't nothing you haven't heard yet, so... but anyway, and so it's just, I mean, yeah, a lot of people would have problems with the fact, like, you straight up said your mom's been raped 3 times. What the fuck? Who does that? At least without letting her say it herself. It's like, yeah, like I said, it's really freaking awkward to me, but it's the only way I can figure out how to make the examples by to simply say that. And seriously, like, my mom sincerely believes that without Mario, she probably wouldn't be here. Like, he got her through so much all the time, and she still to this day like nearly cries when she hasn't seen him in over a month, because she's just like, I really want to see my Mario, I really want to see my cookie. It's like we all do, but I mean, man, she gets so heartbroken when she hasn't seen him in so long. And then if all 3 of us siblings get to see him, or at least 2 of us get to see him, like more than once within like a month, and she hasn't seen him in over, say, like 2 months, she literally sometimes sheds tears, if not cries, because she gets so upset. She's like, I'm heartbroken, I haven't seen my Mario in a long time. Like I said, technically he is a product of one of those rapes. It's like, I mean, it's especially blatant. Now that I think about it, it's even a better example of him, because he goes to show you're mostly a product of how you're raised and what environments you're raised within and what circles of people your parents allow you to be surrounded by and thus surround you by. Like, he's the most impeccable example of that, because especially the parental impact, because no doubt, like, he got, I mean, sure, obviously it's just that he was born with these amazing qualities as a person inside of him off the bat, blatantly, uh, but I'm sure a big impact about a lot of the positives with him comes from our mom. And then a lot of his traumas and a lot of his problems, obviously, just like the majority of this family, come from our dad. And also the group that we were forced to associate with. By birthright, we had to associate with these people. And if you associate with many people outside of it, well, that goes into a whole thing about Jehovah's Witnesses or JWs and how people argue they're a cult rather than their religion because of the way they run things. One of the things is they like to isolate so that you can't associate with people that are considered worldly, in other words, not JWs, because they might poison your spirituality or whatever. And so, because of our dad, we were super tightly hardline, what we consider it, we call it hardlining, or hardliners. He's a hardliner, which means that you're just over the top, like almost if not straight up militant about these things. And so, that's a perfect example of you becoming a product of that, from the original example that spurs from, which is of me saying it has nothing to do with the fact that if your child, in this case him, is a byproduct of a rape. It doesn't matter. They're not going to end up automatically a rapist or a sexual deviant or just a criminal, whatever else. Like, people act like they are, and they aren't. It's like, you might not even realize that that kid can end up being exactly what you need at that point in time. You might not have any idea. You might think it's the worst thing you could have, and then it turns out it could be the best thing for you instead. You just have to get to that point. And of course, there's a lot of people like, well, what if it turns out it wasn't? It was a worse thing. Well, if you seriously can't seem to get a hold of your trauma and everything, there's always the option of adoption. Obviously, you can put it into the foster care system, which thus puts you into an adoption system. Doesn't matter. There's so many parents around the world that would love to be able to adopt a kid that's unwanted. Obviously, that then goes into the argument of, well, what about all the other, few 100,000 kids? What is it, 400,000+ kids in the foster care system alone in the United States? I mean, Jesus Christ, see? That's why we need abortion, because we're overpopulating and nobody wants to fucking have these kids. Nobody wants them. That's why they just rot in the foster care system for however long they manage to keep themselves alive. It's like, yeah, you can be ultra pessimistic, critical, and be like, well, that's the case. It's like, yeah, technically, that is true. There's probably good handful of millions, somewhere between 5 and 10 million, I'd say at least, in the world, across the world, total, in the equivalency of foster care systems, and there's up for adoption at all times. That is really freaking sad. But, again, it goes into the whole, what people consider pro-life debate, of like, but they're still living beings, they're still autonomous individuals, and what if these kids never get adopted? Great. It doesn't mean they can't allow themselves. No, not saying, oh, it's great to not never have anybody love you. Jesus Christ. I mean, I fucking love it. Yeah, I'm an isolative person. I like to be alone. I don't like people. But no, that's not the point. Just saying. Basically making a criticism of myself for saying, great. But the picture I'm trying to paint here is the fact that it's great in the sense that it doesn't necessarily matter. Because though, yeah, at least in the U.S., the foster care system is so screwed up. It's so fucked up. It's beyond belief. Which is like pretty much everything in this country. Let's be 100% honest. It pretty much is like everything. And I mean everything in this country. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. It's pretty much fucked up. So let's get that clear before we continue on here. So now that that's cleared up, yes, the foster care system itself is really fucked up too. But here is another big, important factor with this that I really want to touch on, is the fact that these kids, they may never get adopted. That is true. It doesn't mean that they won't be individuals. They won't know or have a good idea of what they want to do with their lives. They might still want to have jobs. They might still want to go out and defy all the odds and become a rocket engineer, or rocket scientist. They could become just an engineer. They could become electrician. They could become an astronaut. I mean, it doesn't. An inventor, that would be great. A YouTuber. I mean, it doesn't freaking matter. Like, as long as they know they're individuals, they're autonomous, and they are valuable. At least if the only place people they're valuable to is themselves, great, because they can go out and they can make a difference in the world. They could be one of the very people who managed to successfully do a grassroots effort with the experience of the system to fix the system. And also to give people a little more clarity and another perspective on this whole, well, they aren't loved anyway. Nobody fucking wants them anyway. There's already too many of them. So again, they're never going to be loved. It's like, it almost is like at that point they might just come out and be some of those people that come out and say, well, it doesn't matter if the whole world loves you if you don't love yourself first. So what really matters is you got to start loving yourself before you can be loved. Ever ends up mattering or helping you at all. And I would not doubt that there's probably a good few thousand of those people who have been through that same thing. They were a product of that whole debate. They ended up being birthed anyway. They get put up into the foster care system for adoptions because, say, they were a product of rape. And they never get adopted. And then they end up having this, they just end up building while they're there. And then after 18 through on the rest of their life, they build this knowing and this knowledge and this belief via experience that it's nothing. Love means nothing unless you love yourself fully first. And in the end, that's all. The only love that really truly matters is if you really love yourself and care about yourself. If you value yourself in your own life, and you fully do to the fullest possible extent, then why the hell does it matter if nobody wanted to adopt you, if nobody quote unquote loves you? I mean, at that point, I wouldn't think it would even hurt anymore. You'd almost think it as a sense of pride, I would think. And my point is that you can never just throw their lives out and discount them and say, well, they're invaluable now because they see themselves as invaluable, because we see them as invaluable, and we say they're invaluable because invaluable in the words they have no value because nobody fucking wanted to adopt them. There's too many of them. So they just rot in the foster care system until they're 18. They get thrown on the street because they have nowhere else to be. They have no life skills, you know. They probably have trauma because of how fucked up and twisted some of the individuals are that are foster parents in the system, and how the system is, how fucked up CPS is, being fucked up knowing your actual parent themselves decided to say, fuck off, you might look a little bit like my rapist or something that you're a byproduct of. You know, whatever it is. Yeah, that would probably hit real fucking hard in the gut and in the heart to know that you get given up because of a look. Because, oh, you might look like, or, oh, you might sound too much like, or, oh, and it's like, yeah, that would really, that's how, the other side of the fence, how fucked up that is. That would freaking hurt like hell. And then knowing that you're unloved by them, and if anything, your actual parent is scared of you because you might look like, or you might sound like, or you might have a trait like, or it's like, you've got to be kidding me. So just let these, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the road for these wives, these kids, if they get put into the foster care system with the other 400,000 plus or however many we have in the U.S. alone. It's not the end of the road. It's only the end of the road if they are allowed, or should say, if they allow themselves to believe that it is. And if they don't get their heads on straight and instead live life for themselves rather than for trying to find people that would be willing to love them and take them in. Like, instead, you got to take yourself and you got to love yourself first. You got to put all your value into yourself and you got to just live your life how you desire. And that's all it takes, really. And so at that point, to be fair, how is it the end of the road unless you believe it is? It's not. That road is endless. It just depends on if you're willing to go down the road. It might be full of landmines and everything else, and you might just trip off a handful of them and lose some limbs, but on the bright side, you're gonna keep freaking going. If you really mean it, you know? And that's what I think if any... In fact, if I think about it, if you're put through anything in life, that is probably one of the best ways and the most motivating ways and most likely ways that would cause people to actually realize these things and thus actually have that motivation to keep pushing, to keep proving the world wrong, keep shooting down the perceptions, shooting down the stereotypes, shooting down this, that, the other thing. You know, and making a life for yourself on your own, you know, proving that it doesn't necessarily take having a family, necessarily even support system to get there. As long as you're your own family and you're your own support system, basically. It sounds really freaking depressing, but then at the same time, if you think about it, it would no longer be depressing if you actually managed to succeed in that. Now you're living a dream. Now you're living whatever it is you dreamt of doing. Now you're super successful. Maybe you're rich. Maybe you have a lot of valuable opportunities and relationships you keep seizing and you have, you know. Maybe you have an amazing family you've just built by yourself. You know, like, seriously. I mean, it's absolutely awesome if you think about it. And so why are we always busy automatically discounting these kids in the foster care system that never get adopted? You know, if anything, it should be the opposite. People should be encouraging them rather than just saying, nah, fuck you. Nobody wants to adopt you, so you don't matter anyway to anybody. So have fun rotting away. Nobody fucking loves you. Nobody wants you. Go fuck yourself. Instead, do the opposite. Don't auto-discredit them. That's a negative impact you're putting on them. Instead, you should be doing the opposite. We should be putting it out there, only the best of energy and vibe of like, and be sincere with it, of like, just freaking go out and kill it. Like, prove to yourself in the world that you don't need anybody else. You don't need to be adopted or quote-unquote wanted. You only need to want and take care of yourself. At that point, when you put that value in yourself and that love in yourself and that confidence in yourself and you just go out determined and focused, nothing can freaking stop you. So why let these stupid things get in your way? Like, you have the power and the strength and the ability to get out there and freaking make it for yourself. So go out and do it, you know? That's what we should be doing rather than saying, nobody fucking loves you. Nobody loved you. Still nobody loves you. That's why you're now 18 and on the street after being in the foster care system for your entire fucking life. Because fuck you. Which is what people do all the time now. Automatically discount them. Tell them they're basically worthless, uncared for, unloved, unsupported. Nobody gives a fuck about them. They should have been aborted. Basically what everybody does. So instead, we should be, as people, forcing ourselves to push it the other direction. Because, let's be honest, I don't care who you are, what you believe currently, you know deep down inside I'm right with that. That is true. They need to be encouraged rather than the other thing. They shouldn't be shot at, they should be encouraged. You know, which is the opposite of what's happening now, which is basically people are just unloading their figurative rifles at them, saying, You're in love! Nobody values you! You should have been fucking aborted! Because this is why! fucking get adopted because nobody fucking wants you. Nobody loves you. It's like, stop. Reverse that. Turn it around. Because that's fucked up what you're doing, you know? So, in the end, there's, like I said, that's the whole long, overly detailed, multi-exampled argument that it makes for itself. That is the pro-life argument of, instead of abortion, how about you just give that kid a fucking chance? You don't have to adopt them. You don't even have to be a foster parent yourself. You don't have to worry about anybody adopting them. Instead, breed a society, breed a people, breed a world where instead of tearing them down and telling them all this shit, whether it's true or not, do the opposite. Pick them up, encourage them, cheer them on, push them, support them, show them your love, show them you care, even if you aren't willing to adopt them. Even if you're not even in person. Just being able to change the way the world perceives it and them, the way the world talks about it and them, is more than enough. Like, that in itself, when you're sincerely meaning that and you're really putting that out into the world, there's no doubt that's going to change the way that system works, specifically the way the kids in the foster care systems grow as people. It's definitely going to encourage them to be better people. It's definitely going to get them to see far more success rates, even if they never get adopted, even if they never end up having families or parents. They do it for themselves because the world is out here supporting them, encouraging them, and excited for them, and pushing them, and cheering them on, rather than saying, fuck you, nobody gives a damn about you. That's why you just rotted in the foster care system for 18 years and still nobody fucking wants you. Reverse that. Simple as that. But that ends this episode of Chatterbox, talking about the ever so totally not controversial subject of abortion and the such like surrounding the various arguments within the abortion debacles. I hope you got the gist of this. Hope you understood it. Let me know what you think about everything said here down below. Or, not even, if you don't even want to talk about what was said here, but instead, just simply, if it got you thinking and you just want to write something out of like, well, this is what this got me thinking about, or whatever else, you know. Whatever it is, even if you just want to say hi, go ahead and put your comment down below, because interaction is very imperative. It's very important to me. Given other perspectives, other examples that, especially if they're not considered popular, they're not very common. Those are especially encouraged because those are great. I just like to know people's perceptions on these things I talk about in these podcasts. So, yeah, be sure to do that. Be sure to leave a like. That is a like on the video if you did enjoy this as well, or agree with it, or just get the gist of it. Even that works too. Leave a dislike, of course, if you did not like it, because that's very helpful as well. However, I would like to request, as usual, just like with the likes, but especially with the dislikes, I would like to have your constructive criticisms, rather than it being emotional and bashing, or giving insults or something, or saying, or calling names. Instead, I would like to have proper, calm, collective, logical, constructive criticisms about what you would improve in these podcasts, or how I speak in them, or whatever it is, and what you disliked about it, or if it's just isolated to this episode. I would love to know your thoughts. Otherwise, and then falls, please stick around, see what the next video may or may not be, and the next episode of Chatterbox, which will be episode 10, which I recorded like 2 or maybe a little more weeks ago, because I thought I already recorded 9, and it turned out I was actually on 9, so this is going to end up 9, and that one's going to end up 10, because timing and relevance, gasp, I have issues. Anyway, yes, hope to see you in whatever's next. Stay safe, stay fluffy, have a great day wherever you are, and I hope to see you whenever.
Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.